Legend Scale Transformers. These little bots are pretty neat if you ask me. But there's always a question that pops up now and again in the Legend Scale community. And those questions have to do with which figures from each company scale with each other. So today I want to do my best to answer these questions about scale for Legend class figures. What's going on everybody, it's your boy Speakerhead, and today we're going to be talking about some scaling for Legend class Transformers. But before we get into this video, if you enjoy any of this sort of content and want to see more of it, make sure to like and subscribe, it really does help me out. I made it a personal goal to reach 1,000 subscribers by 2024, so if you want to help me reach that goal, make sure to subscribe. Also, friendly reminder that 1 like equals 1 pat for my little buddy Doug here. Say hi, Doug. I also want to mention, if you enjoy any of the music in this video or just want to support the channel in general, it's all part of my royalty-free music label, Speakerhead Studios. All the music on this label is completely royalty-free, so go ahead and use it for any of your content creating needs. Lastly, I want to give a big shout out and thanks to Steven over in the Legend Scale Collectors group on Facebook. He helped me out with some of these comparison photos for this video since I don't own multiple versions of the same character. In return, I asked Steven if he wanted me to shout anything out for him, and he asked me to shout out his business, INKIN Designs. His business makes handcrafted, custom painted cornhole boards which all look awesome. So if you're interested in getting yourself a custom cornhole board for this summer season, go check out INKIN Designs. All the social media links will be in the description below. And thanks again to Steven for helping me out with this video. So now that we got all that out of the way, let's talk about some different scales for Legend class Transformers. To start this off, the main 2 Legend Scale companies we'll be talking about are going to be New Age and Magic Square. However, I will be briefly talking about other Legend Scale companies such as Iron Factory and McFan's Toys as well. First, we're going to talk about the scales between the companies. Then we'll talk about which figures from which companies might work well together. And the first scale we're going to talk about is New Age's scale. New Age figures are generally going to be the smallest in scale out of the Legend Scale companies I mentioned previously. However, New Age does have a couple exceptions to this, which we'll mention later. But for the most part, New Age figures are going to be on the smaller size compared to Magic Square. Something I will mention that has more to do with design is that New Age tends to have a thinner design for their figures compared to Magic Square's figures that have a bit more bulk to them. Both styles look great, but it is something to keep in mind when choosing figures from each company. So moving on to Magic Square scale, as stated before, their figures are going to be ever so slightly bigger than New Age figures. I'll also mention right now that a majority of Iron Factory figures are roughly the same size as Magic Square figures. So if you wanted some stylized Transformers in your collection, Magic Square and Iron Factory are fairly interchangeable. But getting back to Magic Square, their current scale is a bit larger than New Age. However, Magic Square does have a couple of figures that are a little bit smaller than New Age. A couple examples of this are going to be Magic Square Cyclonus and their Jetfire. But besides a couple of exceptions, Magic Square figures are going to be slightly larger and more bulky than New Age figures. Now let's quickly talk about McFan's Toys, which as far as I'm aware is also Mechanical Studios. When it comes to McFan's Toys figures, they're going to be larger than both New Age and Magic Square figures. Which means most of these figures will be oversized if you want to add them in with your other Legend Scale figures from different companies. That being said, there are some figures from McFan's Toys that could possibly work with your other figures. The main examples I can think of are going to be McFan's Toys Triple Changers and their Dinobots. Talking about Triple Changers, neither New Age or Magic Square have released Triple Changers, so these are going to be the only Triple Changers available for Legend Scale. Even though they are a bit on the larger side, I think they could work for both New Age and Magic Square collections. As for the Dinobots, they are a bit large since they are KO oversized versions of DX9's Dinobots. But the McFan's Toys Dinobots should fit into your collection since they are pretty big characters in the show. But to wrap things up for McFan's Toys, a majority of them are going to be a bit too large to fit in with the rest of your Legend Scale figures from different companies. Now that we talked about the different scales for each company, let's get to the part that I'm assuming most of you are here for. And that's which figures from each Legend Scale company would mix together well. So to keep this somewhat simple, I decided to divide all these figures into 5 categories. These categories being mini bots, medium bots, large bots, leader bots, and XL bots. With these 5 categories I listed, I'll give you my recommendations on which figures might work best with each other based on which of these Legend Scale companies you mainly collect. Before we talk about robot mode scaling, let's quickly talk about alt mode scaling. When it comes to vehicle alt modes for Legend Scale figures, it's honestly a bit all over the place. Many of them are fairly similar scale in alt mode, but some of them do seem a bit out of scale. For example, I'm not a huge car guy, but the Nissan Vanette should not be about the same size as a flat-nosed semi-truck. I think the main problem is that some alt modes are going for a very real-world look to them, while other alt modes go for a more cartoon aesthetic. So while some figures alt modes scale together well, there will be some that feel a bit off due to difference in designs. And finally, it's pretty obvious, but none of the Legends scale Transformers that change into handheld items are going to be accurate to scale. However, there are some Legend scale figures that come with tiny versions of their alt mode that other figures can hold. So with that explanation for alt mode scaling out of the way, let's get into scaling the bot modes. Before we talk about scaling with Magic Square and New Age, let's talk about scaling with Iron Factory and McFan's Toys first. From McFan's Toys, you mainly need to stick with figures from that company since they are a larger scale from other companies. So unfortunately, your options if you choose to collect these figures are a lot smaller compared to the other companies. Then moving on to Iron Factory, because they are so similar to Magic Square, you can interchange figures from either company and they should all scale together well. Plus, you can always use my upcoming recommendations for a Magic Square scale collection as reference as well. All you would need to do is swap out every time I say Magic Square for Iron Factory and it would pretty much be the same recommendation. Speaking of Magic Square, let's get into my recommendations on what figures work with Magic Square's scale. Starting with mini bots, both companies' tiny bots would work perfectly fine with Magic Square's scale. However, keep in mind you need to stick with one company for your mini bots if you want them to all be in scale with each other. Moving on to medium bots for Magic Square scale, I would personally stick to Magic Square figures for this category. Even though both companies have great medium figures, New Age's medium bots are a bit too small for Magic Square's scale. So once again, for medium bots, I would recommend sticking with Magic Square. For the larger bots, you could either go with Magic Square, New Age, or even a mix of the two. For these bots, the size difference isn't as large as some of the other categories, so large bots from New Age and Magic Square can work together fairly well. Talking about leaders now, both New Age and Magic Square would also scale well with Magic Square's scale. If you want a slightly bigger leader, I would lean towards Magic Square's leaders, but both companies' leaders would look great in a Magic Square scale collection. Now moving on to the last category, and that's going to be XL figures. To help explain this category more, this is going to be every figure that's larger than a leader figure. The main figures we're going to be talking about in this category are going to be Ultra Magnus, the Dinobots, Jetfire or Skyfire depending on what you call them, the Combiners, and finally Omega Supreme. Starting with Ultra Magnus, I would recommend going with either New Age's version, Magic Square's 2.0, or even McFan's Toys version since it is a KO oversized version of Magic Square's 1.0 Ultra Magnus. Moving to the Dinobots, this category is a bit difficult to talk about at the moment. This is because both Magic Square and New Age are in the process of making their Dinobot teams. Right now, the only Dinobot released from either company is going to be Grimlock from New Age. Going off of New Age's Grimlock, which is about the size of their Ultra Magnus, I think New Age's Dinobots would work with a Magic Square collection just fine. Even though Magic Square has not released their Dinobots yet, I'm going to guess that they'll be in scale with the rest of their Legend scale figures. But if you do want a Legend scale Dinobot team right now, you do have a couple options. And these are the DX9 Warren Pocket Dinobots and the McFan's Toys KO oversized Dinobots. These two Dinobots are the only Legend scale options we have available right now, and they are fairly difficult to get these days. But if you want Legend scale Dinobots in your collection, those are the only options we have available at the moment. Either that or wait for New Age or Magic Square to finish theirs. Moving on to Jetfire, both New Age and Magic Square's version of this character would work great with Magic Square's scale. It's honestly all up to the collector if they want a slightly taller but thinner Jetfire with New Age, or a slightly shorter, more stocky Jetfire with Magic Square. Either way, both would work fine in your Magic Square collection. I'll mention that Iron Factory's Jetfire is an option, however it is much shorter than the other two options I already talked about. He is an awesome looking Jetfire, but if you want one on the larger side, then I would recommend going with the previously mentioned options. Talking about combiners now, I'm going to briefly mention Iron Factory. So Iron Factory has a combiner which is going to be their Bruticus, but he is fairly smaller than both Magic Square and New Age's combiners. So if you want, you can add this guy in with the rest of your Legend scale combiners, but keep in mind he will be shorter than the rest of them. Going back to both New Age and Magic Square, the only combiner that New Age has released so far is going to be Devastator. While Magic Square has released their version of Devastator, Menasor, and are currently working on their Bruticus, which I'm super excited for since he's my favorite combiner. But for scale, all of these combiners are roughly around the same size, so they should work well with your Magic Square collection. I will say if you do want a Devastator that's slightly bigger than the rest of your combiners, then I would recommend going with the Magic Square version because he is a few centimeters taller than the New Age version. I'll also mention that the Mini Zeta Superion does fit in with the rest of these combiners as well if you want to pick them up. So finally moving on to our last XL bot, and that's going to be Omega Supreme. For Omega Supreme, the only options you have available at the moment are going to be the New Age Michael and the Pengu Toys Mighty Miracle God. I actually own both of these Omega Supremes since I wasn't sure which one I wanted to add to my own personal collection. But after owning both of them, I think both would work in any Legend scale collection. It really depends on how big you think Omega Supreme should be compared to combiners in the scale. If you think he should only be slightly taller than combiners or about the size of Magic Square's Devastator, then the Pengu Toys version would work perfect for this scale. However, if you think Omega Supreme should be larger than all the combiners including Devastator, then I would recommend going with New Age's version of Omega Supreme. Either way, both of these figures would look fine in your Magic Square collection. Plus, both companies are releasing Guardian repaints, so you could always get one Omega Supreme from each company that's a different color. So now I talked about my recommendations for a Magic Square scale collection, let's talk about my recommendations for a New Age scale collection. Starting with mini-bots, I would recommend sticking with New Age since the Magic Square mini-bots would be a bit too large. Moving on to medium bots, it's kind of funny because I personally recommend going with Magic Square's medium bots over New Age. I always thought that New Age's mini-bots were always a bit on the smaller side. And compared to New Age Optimus Prime, I think that Magic Square's scale looks much better compared to New Age's more stubby figures. So once again, for medium bots, I would recommend going with Magic Square over New Age. But I will mention that both would work for a New Age scale collection. For the larger bots, just like my recommendation for a Magic Square scale collection, you can go with either company for these guys and they'll look great. For leader bots, you can go with either company and they'll fit great with your New Age scale collection. Now for XL bots, we'll be talking about the same characters and figures we talked about before. Starting with Ultra Magnus, you could really go with any of the Ultra Magnus I? Doug, what's the plural for Ultra Magnus? Starting with Ultra Magnus, you can really go with any of the Ultra Magnus options that I previously stated. This includes Magic Square's Ultra Magnus 1.0 since it's a little smaller and would fit New Age's scale. Moving on to the Dinobots, New Age's Dinobots will work fine based off their Grimlock so far. I'm also pretty sure that the Magic Square ones, once they get released, will work fine as well. But once again, if you would like a full set of Dinobots right now, you can go with either DX9 or McFan's Toys. Moving on to Jetfire, just like my Magic Square scale recommendation, either Jetfire from Magic Square or New Age would work great in a New Age collection. Like I said before, it's all up to which take on the character you like the look of better. And once again, if you don't mind a Jetfire on the smaller size, Iron Factory's Jetfire is an awesome figure. Talking about combiners now, either company should work fine with a New Age scale collection. And finally, talking about Omega Supreme, both the New Age option and the Pengu Toys option would work well with a New Age scale collection. It really just depends on how big you see Omega Supreme compared to combiners. Now that I've given my recommendations for which figures from each company might work well together, it's important to remember that these are only suggestions and you can feel free to collect figures however you'd like. I'm just trying to help fellow Legend scale collectors get an idea of how each company scales with each other so they can decide on which size figures would work best for their own collections. But that's all I gotta say for scaling for Legend class figures, guys. Let me know what you think down below. Let me know down in the comments below which figures from each company might work well together. But once again, if you enjoyed this content and you want to see more of it, make sure to like and subscribe, it really does help me out. Also, once again, friendly reminder that if you enjoyed any of the music in this video or just want to support the channel in general, it's all part of my royalty-free music label, Speaker Red Studios, link in description. And once again, a big shout out to Steven for helping me make this video. But that's going to be it for me, guys. I appreciate you checking out this video, and I'll catch all y'all in the next one. Peace!